Questions?
I have a few questions about the Castañeda series.
Good.
Um, at one point,
Okay, let me say, do you mind if I say a
it's
few words about that series?
yep.
The more you look into it, and the more you look past Castañeda per se, and look at what's being taught to him by Juan and Genaro and Julian and Elias, it's a very systematic approach, and it's really quite elegant. And its appeal is that it's very direct also. And in this day and age, when people are so impatient and when people don't like to read very much, the way that it's presented, I think, is more usable for many young people these days, and that's the spirit in which it's presented. But in terms of its content, the deeper you go, the more sophisticated it becomes, especially this notion of the assemblage point and its movement. I think that could be very useful to folks these days. All right, so thank you for letting me clarify that. What's the question?
I had another one, but this one, when you talked about the assemblage point, it's relevant to that, so I'll ask that instead. Um, what what's the use of having the assemblage point move?
Okay, let me just say a bit about the assemblage point for people that haven't heard of it before. The assemblage point is a hypothetical point in a imagined band of, oh, it's so hard to start cold, but in the Toltec way of envisioning, the human body is surrounded by a luminous egg in which are contained infinite fibers. And these fibers on the inside of this luminous egg match up with energy fibers. These are energetic fibers. These and luminous. These fibers match up with external fibers, and when they match, you get perception. And so in that manner, the internal and the external create what's observed, what's perceived. And so if the fibers on the inside don't find an corresponding outside fiber, there's no perception. But if they do find a match, then there is perception. Uh, Now, also as part of this envisioning, there is a band, kind of a disc. I'll make it this width, but I'm not sure how wide it is. And it extends around it's like a slice through a hard-boiled egg, a disc, like in a wedge of cheese. Uh, and this disc has a perimeter, which is the periphery. And on this perimeter, there's a point called the assemblage point, which can move along the perimeter of the disc, or it can move in. And shifts in the assemblage point represent the minor shifts on the surface of the point just represent kind of trivial or insignificant changes in mood or capacity to see certain things that are relatively mundane. But shifts of the assemblage point inward towards the center of the luminous egg open up entire new bands of emanations and the capacity to perceive things that otherwise could not have been perceived before. And so an example of a rather a dramatic example that I'll use for educational and illustrative purposes is that let's say you're in a car accident and you have a near-death experience. That's going to knock your assemblage point laterally, and it's going to knock it deeper. And so in a near-death experience, you begin to see the world differently. You begin to see your relationship to the world differently. You may even see human life differently because now your assemblage point has been moved inward. Now, I use that example just as an example. There's other things that can move the assemblage point. Crushing depression, the loss of a loved one, severe disappointment, sudden deflation of the ego or great sorrow. And then these teachers in Mesoamerica would deliberately move the assemblage points or help their students move their assemblage points so they would be able to see things that they would otherwise be unable to see. For example, humans tend to take life for granted. They tend to gloss over the mystery, the incredible mystery of this world. They don't see the wonder of having been born in the first place, and the miracle and the mystery of just existing, of existing, because our brains get habituated and we just take it for granted. And that take it for granted attitude is the opposite of the warrior stance towards the world himself and understanding both. I'll just leave that as a little intro, I guess. I hope that helps. Now, what's the question in particular?
Well, so the question is what... So the warriors and the Nagual, they move the assemblage point on purpose. And what do they do once it is moved?
Okay, so I left out a big one, and that's trauma. So a severe trauma can also move the assemblage point inward. And also the other reason is that, quite frankly, the Western psychological model is not helping that much. It focuses on pathology, it focuses on traumatization, but it doesn't, in terms of the way out, it typically just includes cognitive remedies. I'm grossly oversimplifying, I know that. But through cognition alone, it's hard to truly remedy or to grow past say a severe trauma or a severe movement of the assemblage point. So now repeat your question, please.
What does one do when the assemblage point is moved?
It depends on how far it's moved and how deeply it's moved. Entirely.
Mm.
So if it's moved deeply enough, you have an awakening experience.
And what if it's just moved a little bit?
Well, it depends. You could overcome a fear.
Mm.
So let's say a child is afraid of the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And he's growing older now. And he reads a book, I don't know, some kid's book or something like that. And he is, for some reason, not understood. I should also mention that the thing that really moves the assemblage point is spirit in their language. And it's the movement of the spirit or the knock of spirit that represents the opportunity and the chance to deepen as human beings. So, I mean, what happens when you move the assemblage point? That would be the whole range of human experiences. Or, if you're moving it on the periphery, you're dealing with a rather trivial one. All right. If you move it deeper, then you have a whole new band of emanations, as they describe it, light up, and now you can see what people mean when they say, my heart aches and the world is blue. Or maybe you could understand a blues song for the first time the way it's meant to be understood, which is emotionally. For some people, other people, it's trivial. And so, and so what it does is it makes the more you can move your assemblage point, and especially the deeper you can move it, the more fully human you are. And it's just another way of envisioning these processes for which we really have no accurate or adequate we have no adequate taxonomy in the modern West. And some things are, and they also divide things up into the first, second, and third attention. The first attention, which is where we're fixated right now, although it took a lot to get there, It took the Enlightenment in Europe to get there, where rationality is the center of our way of looking at the world. Reason, rationality, that's very, very powerful and very much admired by men of the second and third attention. Well, mainly the second attention. The second attention is much more fluid and includes things like love, hate, fear, understanding, peace, things that we can't measure, things that aren't necessarily rational or logical. They're the intangibles. And in there also becomes our imaginings of the world and our mind. And when you think about it, we each have a kind of a little mental model that we walk around with, but we rarely examine it. So people walk around with the imagination that there's a little guy in their head and she's directing the show, or that they have a little self that's somewhere in their brain, and that's the thing that's in charge of their life. Well, in the second attention, you open up a bit and you realize that, wait a minute, I'm not here by accident, and there are forces at large much greater than me, and that I can ally with these forces or not. I can accord with these ambient forces or flows, or I cannot. And so then moving to the third attention is Satori, Kensho, waking up, sudden nirvana. So those are the three attentions. And then the movement of the assemblage point is what allows us to move from one attention to another also. Now, Carlos got into a lot of trouble because he was an academic, and academics don't like this stuff. And what he did was very, very radical at the time, which was, instead of studying things as an anthropologist and looking at his subjects in the third person, he went native. He became as one of them. And he learned much more that way, obviously. But he wrote in a style that was very compelling to a lot of people, and his books were bestsellers. And so that makes it very useful for introducing young women and men to the way of the warrior, which is, by the way, very similar. It's almost identical to virtually every serious depth spiritual tradition that I know of. I mean, it's literally the same thing. It's just words in a way that's more accessible to kids these days. Does that help?
Yep. I have a follow-up.
Good.
On the topic of the third attention, at one point, Don Juan tells Carlos that he's leaving to enter the third attention with his party.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to enter the third attention specifically with his party?
What that means is to be consumed by the fire within. It means that so it's a very kind of accurate description, because when the third attention arrives, when Kensho Satori or however you want to name it, true waking up occurs, it's infinite light. It's like a fire with no heat. It's like flames but there's no flames per se. It's that everything is a flame. Everything is like so much more vivid and alive, and it's not material. It doesn't feel particularly material, and there's no boundary to yourself or to your capacity to understand, something like that. And so he's saying, hey, look, we got to get out of here because we got some serious work to do. Me and the senior guys are going to go and enter the third attention, which is so far from normal waking that one is not particularly interested in functioning in this world in that state. Now, as it becomes assimilated, then one does indeed return to work for the will of the world. I mean, the good of the world. oftentimes. But some people don't. Some people just hang out in that peace, depending on other factors. The spirit. And so the knock of the spirit is really important. So if I might, the knock of the spirit is just the first time spirit taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, have you thought about this? Or have you imagined this? And so it's like the first, so most of the world, tragically, is walking dead. They have no idea of spirit, no idea of what we are, where we are, where we came from, where we're going, any of that. And so they live as these kind of dry, unexamined lives. But for the fortunate ones among us, the spirit knocks at some point, and we either listen or we don't. And my strong advice is to listen, but that's just me. Okay? Now, what was your question?
My question was, why does he go to the third attention with his party? But I think you answered it.
Well, they probably want to get away from the students for a while. Yeah, they signed on for a lot. And the organization is actually very similar to a Sufi organization, an organization in other kinds of spiritual traditions. One teacher and a limited number of students. And then that teacher has his teacher, and then that teacher has his teacher. And one of the other things that's wonderful about this series, as difficult as it may be, when you get into the weeds of Carlos, but outside of Carlos, it's crystal clear, is that we have Carlos, and he has a teacher and a benefactor, Don Juan and Genaro. And then Don Juan and Genaro have Don Julian from Mexico City, who's their teacher. And then Don Juan had the extraordinary good fortune to not only know Julian, his Nagual, but Julian's teacher, Elias. And these are old school guys, so they're pretty interesting, dating back to before the Mexican Revolution. And it's very hard for Americans and children from wealthy countries to imagine life, let's say before the Mexican Revolution, where life was tough. And
when was that? 1910?
Yeah, somewhere there around there, 1910, something like that. But that's Elias. But so there was mass migrations, there was starvation, there was wholesale murders and war, there was massacre and enslavement of Indians, including Don Juan. And so these guys had tough lives. But then they adapted somewhat for the softer generation of the 60s, Carlos and his ilk, and then so on and so forth. But I think it's really important to understand the cultural context in which this occurs. And remember that the Toltec,
I keep forgetting it.
Yeah, that's very important. And the Toltec seers, remember, they had to talk about moving your assemblage point. When the Spanish arrived, that they annihilated them. Smallpox and warfare and European technology, and so they had to adapt, and they did. And so the new seers are post that the conquest, and they formulated their knowledge into a systematic understanding with metaphors that are useful, I think, today, because they're very, very concrete-ish. Now, it's not nearly as elegant or as evolved, say, as, for example, the Tantrayana of Tibetan Buddhism, but it's the same thing, and you don't have to join the club. I mean, in Tantrayana, you don't have to, but you usually do end up signing up for that program. And there's something that's similar to that among the Sufis, right? and among Rosicrucians and among other spiritual orders, the Jesuits, so on and so forth. But here there's more freedom, and I think that freedom suits contemporary women and men. Some of them more than some of the other techniques, like Zen, for example. Zen is gorgeous, but it's arduous. And to do it and get results, you really have to apply yourself, and it's not easy, and it's not fun, and it's not interesting beyond a certain point. Until you get to a certain point, then it becomes fascinating. But it requires quite a bit of study and understanding. And the irony is that they say, well, you don't need to, it's not about the intellect, and it's not about the intellect. But you still need to understand what you're doing. And to understand that, for some people, that's a long road. You have to understand why impeccability is so vitally important in every one of these traditions, and why you have to take care of business first, so your mind isn't overloaded with worries and concerns and things that are unrelated to spiritual evolution. And so a serious tradition is always going to insist on that first, in my opinion. Now there is an exception, a very very big exception, and I'm not sure how. I'm not an authority, so I shouldn't speak too much. But what was coming to mind was the Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. I'm not sure how much emphasis they put on having your feet planted squarely on the ground, being able to provide for yourself and your family, and making sure all that's taken care of. But the way they may do that is by forming a commune, a community that takes care of that.
Right.
But then now you're back into something akin to a monastery, albeit with both genders, or all genders, I should say now. Okay, sir?
Yes.
Thank you for letting me explain that.
Something I noticed when the other day I was watching the birds, and one of them was like swooping in, and I was just imagining what it was like to be a bird swooping in like that, and I could feel like, the sort of heart-sinking feeling of that dropping, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But then I also felt like a tightening in my just like the lower part of my body was just like clenching up, and then some like emotions associated, like a feeling of like wanting to cry almost or something, and kind of.
It sounds like you.
Yeah, something like that, and then
you moved your assemblage point.
And so I guess my question is, what's with like the clenching up and wanting to cry? Because I also notice that when like if I'm just sitting and I'm doing the exercise of turning the light around, I also get this like similar feeling sometimes as I'm deepening into the practice, and it feels like it blocks me from going further.
How comfortable is the culture you come from with men crying?
I mean, it's Western culture, so not the most.
Okay, well, the reason you've clenched is because there's fear of the crying. There's fear of weeping, and that becomes. I remember watching the Dalai Lama. He would be laughing his head off, and then someone would say something that was sad, and he would immediately empathize, and he would start crying. Right? I mean, tears rolling down his face, and then something else happened, and he laughs again. The fluidity of his affect, of just the freedom, right? So the contraction in the belly is probably due to ambivalence about weeping. But in this work, you got to get ready to weep, because you'll weep every day. There was a time, many times, when I wept every day just out of joy and gratitude. It's like it's
right.
You can't contain it. But for that, just practice crying. I mean, just don't be afraid of it. And with regard to the swooping,
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the image that came to mind was one of those. Who are the skiers that go on the
Mm.
what's that called?
The ski jumping.
Yeah,
Or
ski
something.
jumping.
Ski jumping?
Yeah, and at first there's that feeling, right? But then you become used to it,
Yeah.
and then you start to feed off of it. You love it. You just can't get it. And then it becomes part of you. But yeah, that'll move your assemblage point too. So yeah, I would guess. It's just a guess, but that contraction is probably due to fear of weeping openly that you'll lose control or something. So let yourself lose control.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay.
And it may be easier for you to do that alone at first. And then you realize that no one's
Right.
going to judge you. And if they do judge you, then that's their limitation.
But isn't it also good to be able to control yourself? Because there's times where
Mm-hmm.
you need to act instead of weep.
Yes. So again, a warrior is characterized by his rage. Right? So there may be times when you want to not weep openly. But those are actually kind of rare when you think about it. And it's
Right.
other people's problem, not yours. I learned that from the Dalai Lama directly, and I am very, very grateful to him for that. And the freedom of emotion, the freedom for emotion to flow, that's the mark of an evolved human, where you don't, because the energy that it takes to repress all of that is a large amount.
Right, I can feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to free up all the energy. A warrior needs all of his energy, or all of her energy.
Mm.
And that's why impeccability is so vital. But you got to be impeccable with yourself, and you
Right.
can't be at war with yourself,
Right.
because then you're just wasting energy. Okay?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Question.
I guess as just a short comment or follow up on that last point about wasting energy. I've been like trying to focus on how I waste energy and stopping all the waste and
The leaks. I call them leaks. Leaks of energy.
the leaks, right? And yeah, I feel like it's a slow process, but
Impeccability
It's,
is the key. Impeccability is key. That's one. And two is, and because when you're impeccable, you don't have to spend a lot of time on everything. You just do it impeccably,
Mhm.
and then you don't have to worry about it. When you're sloppy, then you have to like go, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. Then you have to explain yourself maybe to others, or you have to or you waste your energy rationalizing your lack of impeccability. Whereas if you're just impeccable, you do your best, then you don't have to do that. That's one. And two is, a warrior's never at war with himself. If you're going to do something, do it with all your heart.
right.
And only then will the Tao or the way or the spirit have your back, if that's to occur, right? But whatever it is, if you're going to do it, do it. Don't do it halfway, stop, and then ambivalate, and then think about, well, maybe I should turn around. And that's not the way of the warrior. A warrior must commit. And so that's why they say that every battle is like the last battle. And it may, in certain ways, it may as well be, because it's the accumulation of these acts of the warrior. It's the accumulation of them that transforms the character and creates the
Well,
warrior.
in a way, it's the only battle, right?
Yes. Exactly. Very good. Excellent. Very good. Yeah, because you're only here now. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I might mention also that one of the things we're doing on this channel is putting chapters up that are digestible in chunks, maybe half an hour, where people can listen to a chapter at a time. And I'm trying to select the chapters that are most useful for the general warrior student, right? So there'll be a few more of those coming up, because frankly, some of the chapters get off into really Carlos's personal stuff, and it's not relevant. Some of it is, but not all of it. Question.
Here's another one on the Carlos Castañeda books. There's a passage at one point, Don Juan says something like, men are accountable, but women are not, and so men have trouble to erase themselves and feel guilty.
Say that again. Say that again. Say that again.
He says men are accountable, but women are not, and so men have trouble erasing themselves, and they feel guilty about erasing themselves.
I have a feeling that if Don Juan was talking to one of his female students, he would have said the same thing in reverse. I mean, he's trying to. So Carlos is a young man, and he's still trying to negotiate his relationships with women. And I don't know, but I suspect that Don Juan's trying to get him to take responsibility like a man, right? But women are more open to this, and this comes to them more easily. And they have a similar set of concerns, but not being accountable is not one of them. I mean, in other words, they have to be just as accountable, but in a completely different way because of the nature of their circumstance.
I see.
We need more women warriors in this world. We really do. We don't need imitation men. We need women warriors, in my opinion. I hope I don't get in trouble for that, but in trouble. One of the good things about being this old is, nobody cares. So I don't think I'll get in trouble for that. Women are the twin halves of men, or men are the twin halves of women, which is the corollary.
On the topic of luminous eggs, can one see their own luminous egg, or is it more of a metaphor?
You could, in a second attention. See, the thing about metaphors is that we live by metaphors all the time. And because there are metaphors, and because we share them with our parents and our teachers at school, we act like they're real. Things like the unconscious. We act like it's real. Like in various political things, we act like they're real, but even though so this line between metaphor and imagination is an interesting one, and one of the things that I hope somebody does soon is create a taxonomy of imagination, because there's many different kinds of imagination. But yeah, in the second attention, you could visualize a luminous egg, and you can visualize the emanations, and you can feel when the emanations light up, depending on how evolved you are in the second attention. Now, as with the Sufis, and as with the Buddhists also, there's no glory in just being in the second attention. You need the first attention too. And so the student of promise has both reason in the first attention and I don't want to say imagination, because it's much more than that, but has the fluidity of thought, of creative capacity mentally to operate also in the second attention, or in the heart, right? So you can't just be cerebral, you also need the heart. And you can't just have the heart, you also need to have reason. And so the Dalai Lama, for example, he's a rigorous thinker, amazingly rigorous. And the Sufis as well. Never met one who wasn't also a rigorous thinker. And the same thing's true here in Nagualismo. These guys are quite rational, but they're able to move from one to the other. It's called the path with two bridges or something like that. But with Carlos, what his problem was he couldn't move into the second attention as easily as he might have. Now, if he were a woman, it'd be much easier. Mm-hmm. And so they spent literally 10 years trying to get this guy to open up his second attention, because he was kind of tight-assed, right? Mm-hmm. Okay? that metaphor of tight ass, I don't know if it precedes or is from Freud's anal personality, anal retentive personality.
What does that mean?
So Freud, talked about fixations at different points of development.
Right.
Like oral fixation, but there was also anal fixation and phallic fixation. But the anal fixation was like wanting to hold on to everything you got, and not wanting to let go of anything, right? So you're tight and you're obsessive and you literally don't want to let go. Hence tight-assed. But I don't know if that was a popular cultural understanding, like hysteria, or it was something he invented. Either way, it's kind of useful. But again, see, these are oral compulsive or anal retentive. These are imaginary constructs. And yet in some areas that people act like they're real, or like the Jungian archetypes. Those are imagined. And so we need our imagination. We need our hearts. But we need reason too. And that's called sobriety, right? To keep the north. That's what's meant by sobriety. I remember when my teachers would talk about it, I'd go, sobriety? I haven't been drinking. And what they mean is to have a sober stance towards life. Something along those lines. Yes, sir.
There's a part in, I think it's Journey to Islam, where Carlos goes to Don Juan's house, and there's like a lingering energy in the house that Carlos is afraid of, and he somehow like fights it and has to overcome it. Why
do we have to tell folks if someone has been murdered in a house or killed in a house before we sell it to them? Isn't that a law? That's a law in several states. Is that a law? Do you know? Did you have a non-suicide, non-murder in the house caveat on your inspection?
I have no idea.
I think realtors are required to do that. They have to tell you if someone's been murdered or committed suicide in the house. For the same reason. Does that help?
Kind of. So is there a legitimate danger to these energies?
Danger?
Yeah,
not to a warrior. Not to a warrior, there's no danger. Okay. You know that a guitar that's been played by a master is valued more than a brand new guitar. Why is that? You're a guitarist. Tell me why. I'm talking classical guitars. Or let's use violin.
Well, on some level, there's just something about it that there's a quality to it.
Well, that's true.
And it could be like the oils, or there's also just an appeal to the mind of like having something, an object from someone that was high status, right?
Okay, got all those things.
Just like celebrities.
But that's a collector's item. Why would they be treasured by the player?
What was that?
Why would the player pay more money for a violin that had been... Okay, I'll tell you what I was told. I was told, and I find this very believable. So you have this wooden structure, and it's fairly well fixed. But as you play it over the years, it's exposed to certain harmonics. It's exposed to certain frequencies, and those correspond to the ones that are going to be played, and they're harmonic, and they're part of the canon or whatever. And that the wood becomes more harmonic with those vibrations by virtue of the fact that it has to vibrate at that over a period of time. Do you find that credible? So whereas if you're always playing off tune or with vibrations that don't correspond to the notes or to the minors or the flats or whatever, the sharps, then you get an instrument that doesn't have the frequencies embedded into its wood. So that's what I've been told by several musicians, actually. So I don't know. You could check into it. But
Yeah.
see, like sensitivity to that might be something that only a master musician can detect, right? And if have you ever played a great classical guitar that's been played before by they're extraordinary things. It's not true with electric and with acoustic so much. Although Willie Nelson's guitar, that probably has a lot of resonance.
Yeah, acoustic.
So
I think it's true.
all
I've
I'm
noticed
saying
it
is
on
that
acoustic guitars.
I'm sorry, what?
I said I've noticed it on acoustic guitars.
Yeah, so it'd have to be acoustic or have to be classical. Now, we can acknowledge that exposure to vibrations can affect physical objects. That we know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just basic physics. Some people believe that if the energies in a house have been very, very negative to the point of suicide or murder, that's something that's there. And I've already taught you about the psychiatric diagnosis without the patient being present by the vibrations in the people in the room. So I don't know. It would depend on your sensitivity, and I'm not sensitive enough to pick anything up like that, but you might be able to. Depends on where your assemblage point is.
Well, what is it?
But be careful, people call you crazy. But people. We're being run by lunatics. We're being run into the ground by absolute lunatics, right? So why are you worried about people calling you crazy?
Yeah.
No, there's reasons for work and stuff, things like that. But go ahead.
Right. No, that makes sense to me, and I feel like I'm sensitive to that kind of thing.
All right, you may be.
But then sometimes I don't know if it's just like I'm making it up as well.
Well, see, this thing is, once you have a deeper understanding, and this can come from the Tibetan Buddhists, or it can come from the Toltec, or it can come from the Sufis, or God knows where, the Taoists, it doesn't matter, or the Christians, it doesn't matter. As you evolve, you will acquire more sensitivities, more range. You'll be able to move your assemblage point at will. You'll be able to direct your attention to change your assemblage point. Pardon me. You can change your assemblage point by meditation. You can change your assemblage point by physical exercise or something else dramatic. You can deepen it by going and experiencing something new you've never seen before, or heard before, or felt before. And so all of these are in the worldview and experience of the warrior. So instead of being just this passive, like cork bobbing on the ocean, wherever it goes, who cares? You become in tune with the goal, and the goal is the deepening of your consciousness, the deepening of your understanding, the deepening of your humanity itself, and thereby you live a much better human life, a much richer, deeper, profound, sensitive, joyful, and at times sorrowful life, because you see some of the silliness that goes on and the evil that people do to each other out of ignorance. But that's that's the gig. It's a marvelous gig. I hope I answered your question.
I guess just last follow up on that. What in the book, Carlos is seems to be fighting the energy, and is physically exhausted from it.
Yeah, Carlos goes
what does that mean?
Carlos goes way off that end, and then goes woo way to the other end, and he just swivels back and forth. And so the other thing that makes these books incredible is that the patience of his teachers, good God, and the effort they put into this kid. Of course, they were getting something out of it. They were getting their tradition documented, and I'm fairly sure Julian or Elias, the teachers and benefactors of Juan, had made it clear that we need to do this. We need to systematize this stuff. But they're busy living life, right? And they don't particularly feel like writing all this stuff down. And how could they? And so they needed a live version. So that's what they got. And so yeah, Carlos is an example of how crazy things can get when the students veers off too far in either direction too quickly without enough understanding. But bless his heart, we're deeply indebted to him, Carlitos. Does that answer that?
Sort of.
Well, let's go deeper
So
into it. Let's go deeper into it.
yeah, I still don't understand what it means to like get in a physical alteration with like a seemingly non-physical energy or bad vibrations.
If a kid went into the bathroom to hide from the monster that was under the bed or in the closet, that would be getting physical about something imagined. Is that what you
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
And remember, early on, they were using incredibly potent anticholinergics. I mean, as hallucinogens. I mean, that's hardcore. I mean, those things will kill you, right? They do kill some people. We're not talking mushrooms and marijuana. We're talking, datura and, these anticholinergics that basically poison the system. So you don't go into a hallucinogenic state. You go into a delirium. So in a delirium state, all bets are off. Have you ever seen somebody? I spent a lot of times in the ERs before I went to college and med school. And one of the things we'd have back then was people come in severe alcoholism, but they were in withdrawals. They're in DTs, and they're at war with these bugs that are crawling all over their skin, right? And that's delirium, right? So in delirium, I stayed up once for 120 hours straight just to see I could do it and see what it would be like. I stayed up as long as I could. But on the last night, I was walking down the street in front of my house, and there was this dog behind me. It was about 12 feet tall, purple, and it had dog tags, and it was ringing. It scared the hell out of me. That's sleep deprivation. So that's delirium. All right. So in delirium, all kinds of crazy things happen. And although Don Juan, who was Indio, he spent his life, a hard life, in the desert and in the Yucatan and in other places. Living very close to the ground. I mean, he could survive in the desert by himself. Not many people can do that. Hunt food and find water and all that other stuff.
Right.
And he'd worked on basically a slave on a sugar plantation. So what was I going to? I wanted to tie that somehow to the delirium of Carlos, but I think I've lost the trail of that thought. Unless you can help me back. What was the original question?
The physical alterations with energies.
Well, it ties in somehow, but I lost the thread because I started thinking about the nature of Don Juan's actual life and how living in that desert is so different than living in LA. And so, so now so Carlos comes, and now he's in the desert. He's at a complete loss. I mean, he hasn't lived with those shadows. He hasn't lived with those creatures. I mean, there's big cats, there's lizards, there's snakes, there's all kinds of things. And all of this is unfamiliar to this relatively soft kid from LA. And what the point I was trying to draw was that for Don Juan, this is second nature, right? That's where he grew up.
I see.
Okay?
Yeah.
How are we doing? You got another question? I have a bit of time.
Okay. Here's a minor one. Do you think that caffeine has any effect on like meditation and practice?
Well, to be honest, I think it depends on the physiology of who's drinking the caffeine. For some, another question would be: does caffeine withdrawal have an effect on meditation? I'd say yeah. If your body's not accustomed to caffeine, then yeah, it will definitely change it. But caffeine is a mild nootropic, and tobacco as well. That's why it was used by Native Americans in smoking ceremonies, I'm told. But why do you ask?
I ask because I've been pretty dependent on coffee, and I was exploring taking a break and seeing how it affects me and seeing if it makes a difference in being able to relax.
So that's the way to answer that question. That's how a warrior answers a question. They do it, and then they find out for themselves. What my opinion means nothing, right?
Well, it can add to what I'm
Well, it could,
right?
but that's not the role I feel comfortable taking beyond a certain point, because a lot of these questions can only be answered by the individual physiological system. Right? For some people, it's nothing. For other people, they drink half a cup of coffee in the morning and they say they can't sleep at night. So people are very, very different. All right?
Yeah.
Anything else before we stop today? Is it time?
What's that?
Anything else before we stop?
I had one more.
Okay.
He keeps mentioning the wall of fog.
Yeah, you ever seen that?
No. What does he mean by that? What is that? I mean, I've been in states of mind where I feel foggy or I feel like there's a fog.
There you go.
I don't know if
have you ever
is that kind of what,
been at work or been trying to work?
Cloudy and
yeah, foggy.
What's that?
Mitote. Have you read the Four Agreements?
Is that all that means? Yeah.
All right, that's a mitote. That's the fog of. It's like being in a
Mitote.
Yeah, you can't think well. You're all fogged up. Now he gets very dramatic about it, I think. And remember, in Mexico in the desert, there's fog. There's hot and there's cold and there's a little bit of moisture somewhere, I suppose, and it's a big deal when they see it. And so there's actually fogs rolling in, and then you have the sunlight hitting it, right? Say at dawn or at twilight. And then you've got a wall of fog. Mm-hmm. It's like the Bay Area. When you're driving from the peninsula up to the city, on the left you see that bank of fog. So it's a whole range of things like that. But Carlos is a writer, and he's not a bad writer, right? And he keeps people entertained,
right? Which
is another reason why I think it might be useful for folks, is entertaining, but don't get lost in the details of Carlos's kind of strange mind. God bless it.
Mm-hmm. Last question.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna be traveling for a few days, and I don't have work.
Travel is a great time for a warrior. Travel impeccably.
Gonna bring some books. I was thinking of reading Shikasta again.
Can't go wrong with Shikasta, especially these days.
Yeah.
Shikasta is a book by the Nobel laureate Doris, in which she describes basically a global war on white people. She wrote it in the 80s, and an envoy that's sent to try and keep humanity from destroying itself in its silliness. But it's a beautiful book of space fiction. She was universally derided because what was a woman writer writing science fiction or space fiction back then? Being a Sufi, she said, go screw. I'll do what I want. But it'll be a classic in 100 years, and it'll be, classical literature thereafter. So, but go ahead. Yeah, so you can read that again. And have you read The Marriages?
I read The Marriages. That one, I really like that one.
Okay, so The Marriages, I think, is that the second book in the series? And the second book of the series was made into an opera by Doris Lessing and Philip Glass, none less than Philip Glass. And it was produced, I think, once or twice, because these are very, very, very demanding productions. If you've ever been to a Philip Glass opera, if you haven't, you should try and get to one. They're amazing. So how many books in the series? It's 4 or 5.
It might be 5. I only read the first 2.
Superb literature by any criteria whatsoever. Doris Lessing was a master writer and a student of Idris Shah.
There's
Thank you for letting me plug her books. Maybe I should become an Amazon affiliate or something.
You should.
Maybe. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
Would that be better? Nothing wrong with that.
Okay. What? I'm sorry. What was the question?
Well, I was going to ask, should I just continue the series, or should I? I mean, it's been a number of years since I read the first one.
If it's been a number of years, then you're going to read a new book when you read it now.
Right.
And also, if it's been enough years, it was before this obsession with white people, had taken hold. Right. And so it's interesting because she saw the writing on the wall. Now, the other thing is, now this is very interesting. Mm-hmm. She grew up in Rhodesia, and so she'd seen mass massacres. I mean, the horrible massacres and genocide and things like that. Horrible things that we hope we never see in our lifetime. But she grew up right around it before she moved to London. So Doris Lessing, a remarkable woman in every way you can imagine. Okay, sir. Anything else?
Okay. No, that's all.
I don't have to tell you how dangerous the AIs are in terms of being able to addict you and capture you. Okay, so you know that. So I'm just saying that to everybody else. Okay, keep the faith.
Okay.
See you. Ciao. Bon voyage.